I am very pleased today to be able to welcome Kate Goldstein Felker, class of 2005. I also just wanted to quickly let everybody know that Gabby Rusomano teaches at the university level in New York. So she is teaching class tonight and unable to be with us, unfortunately. So I'm going to attempt to fill in. Nobody can really fill Gabby's shoes, but we'll do our best. So Kate, welcome. Thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Excellent. So let me just start with an intro, and then I'll turn it over to Kate. She can talk through her slides, and then we can also ask questions. She's also welcoming questions all throughout the presentation, so just drop those in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. I'll keep an eye out for those and just let Kate know if you have anything throughout the presentation. So tonight it's our privilege to welcome Kate Goldstein Felker, GA class of 2005, to the webinar stage to discuss the application of business strategy. Ms. Goldstein is currently a senior vice president at SSI Strategy and has been a management consultant for all of her career. She'll be sharing more about her work in developing and implementing organizational strategies, managing complex initiatives, and building and leading teams. Kate attended GA for all of upper school, during which time she was involved with the Singing Patriots, although she said that was minimal, and was a member of the Cum Laude Society. Her GA roots go deep, as her dad is also an alumnus, and her mom is an honorary alumna, class of 1760, and was on the upper school faculty, as well as the head of the all-school counseling department for many years. After GA, Kate attended Penn State University, where she earned her Bachelor of Arts in International Politics, Economics, and Spanish in just 3 years. Did I notice that right, Kate? You finished in 3 years?
3.5.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a lot crammed in.
She began working in business consulting right after college with a position at the well-known Deloitte Consulting. Some key phrases from Kate's bio on the company website that caught my interest were passionate about applying innovative approaches. And I also thought addressing the highest areas of unmet need for patients was really, that captured my interest. I'm anxious to hear more. She's going to share more about that passion with us now. So thanks for joining us, Kate.
Thank you, Heather, and hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here and talk about my experience in management consulting. As Heather mentioned, I'm currently an SVP at a small consulting firm called SSI Strategy, which is focused solely on supporting biotech and pharmaceutical companies. So that's where the unmet need for patients comes into play. But over the last 14 years in consulting, I've worked at both big and small companies. I've supported clients across various industries. So really today's discussion is a reflection of all of those experiences. So if we can go to the next slide, I'll just kind of talk about the agenda really quickly. I'll start by walking through, what even is consulting? I know that the term itself is incredibly vague. I'll talk about the path that led me to where I am today. And then finally, I'll talk about some skills that folks can begin to think about building if you're interested in a future career in consulting. So again, if anybody has any questions, please pop them in the chat. Happy to take them as we go. So next slide, please. All right, so what is management consulting? It's obviously a very broad term that can mean different things to different people. But today we're specifically referring to management consulting, which is an established industry that's based on helping business leaders solve their greatest strategic and/or operational challenges. So consulting work is typically project-based with a defined problem that the consulting team is trying to solve for through whatever the project may be. And a huge part of consulting is really learning how to become effective problem solvers. So an example there could be that, a company might need help defining its 5-year strategy and then figuring out what kind of plan do we need to put in place to actually be able to achieve that strategy. Another potentially more operational example could be like, hey, we need a better budgeting process and we don't know what that looks like. We need help to put one in place. So ultimately, consulting projects can vary very widely depending on the firm that you work for. Generally, the larger firms like Deloitte that Heather mentioned, they serve a broader array of industries and may offer a broader type of services, whereas the smaller firms, which are known as boutique firms, typically specialize either by industry, by type of services that they provide, or maybe both. So I've highlighted a couple examples on the screen there, but there are literally thousands of consulting firms that could serve any sort of, potential need. And I'm sure that everybody on the line has heard of some others that are not reflected on that slide. So the main thing you might be wondering is why would a company ever bother bringing consultants in? And it really comes down to two things. Either they don't have the skills or they don't have the time to solve whatever the problem is themselves. So consultants are known for coming in with sort of this external, unbiased view of what the solution really should look like based on what they get to know about the client company itself, as well as what they know about the industry from experience doing multiple similar projects with multiple similar companies and really being able to apply some best practice. As I sort of touched on before, consultants are uniquely trained in problem solving approaches and communication techniques. And so, when we get to a client, we usually find that there's really not great alignment on what needs to be done or what the ultimate solution should look like. And so all of those skills really lend some credibility to the consultant versus potentially an internal team that could be viewed as biased or pushing an agenda that might not jive with the rest of the organization. So that's sort of the high level, like very, very, very high level of what is consulting. I'll pause for just a second to see if that makes sense or if there's any questions in the chat. Otherwise, I'll keep going. Anything?
I'm not seeing anything. Yeah.
Okay. Nope, sounds good. So then we can go on to the next slide.
Why isn't it advancing? There we go. Is that the right one?
Yes, that's great. So obviously there's a ton of variability in the consulting approach and the type of projects that consultants may take on. A lot of this will really vary by firm, by industry, by type of project, but really at the highest level, consultants typically follow some semblance of the process that's on the screen. And I obviously kept it very high level on purpose. But so first, what we do is we really just research the company to understand what's going on. So we read documents, we interview people that work there, we try and get to really kind of understand the nuances of what we call the current state, especially in the context of whatever the project may be. So I personally always pull together a few slides that would document, what I've heard, since as we talked about, getting that alignment is usually quite challenging, and you'd be surprised how little people are on the same page when you first get on the ground at a new organization and you're trying to, make some changes. So once we have sort of this common view of what's going on, I then work with my clients to define what the future should look like. The future state should always uniquely reflect the needs of the individual client. So really cookie cutter processes are not going to fly, but we also kind of bring in these best practices that I talked about earlier. So the future state ultimately should be this like bespoke, tailored solution that marries the unique situation at the client as well as what's going on across the industry. Presumably, the reason why the consultants are there is because there's a gap between what, and if we could go back, thank you. So presumably there's a gap between what's going on in the current state and what we envision our ideal future state to look like. And we need to figure out how we're going to close that gap. So usually one of our key sort of outputs is going to be like the plan to get from A to B. A lot of times a project will stop there and the company will choose to kind of take that plan and do what they will with it. Hopefully they implement it. But I sort of find that really the most effective consultants and the ones that build not only the deepest credibility, but just the most longstanding relationships are those who stick around to actually like implement the change and really see it through. So you're going really from like start to finish in terms of the entire process. That's obviously a very oversimplified explanation of what happens. And there's definitely different sort of shades, and depending on the project, you will prioritize, you know, certain elements of this process over others. But I would say that overall, this is kind of what I view as the typical consultative process. So again, any questions about that? Yeah.
Let me throw in a question here, Kate, because, you know, again, going back to what my research a little bit about you, that innovative strategies really leapt out at me. And, you know, obviously that's from your time at GA and ever since, that's definitely something that we try to hone in students, right? Is that need for innovation. How often do you find that that's what you're bringing as a consultant, and you know, helping your clients think about things differently than they ever have before, and actually providing solutions they didn't think that they could do themselves?
It's a really interesting question. It's actually something that we talk about a lot because, you know, as I mentioned, my specific firm, we focus on biotech and pharma. And what we find is there's a huge difference between some of these small, almost like startup-like biotech companies versus like the big pharma companies that maybe have everything in place already and are looking really to optimize. So we tend to focus on these big innovative projects in companies, first of all, that have an appetite for innovation. Some companies just flat out are not interested in change, but also in the companies that are not like looking to build the foundation. The foundation is already in place, but they have the ability, as I said, to optimize and go from kind of being good to being great. Does that answer your question?
It does, definitely. That must be really fascinating for you to come into that scenario and, you know,
it is. And especially in an industry like pharma where the technology is so advanced, it's almost like incomprehensible. It's really cool to think about ways that you can kind of continue to push the envelope there. So, you know, I've luckily been able to work on some new and emerging therapies that have been really cool. So like early exploration into gene therapy was something that I thought was really cool. And this is coming from someone who has no previous interest or experience in science, but somehow got into that. And that's sort of a nice segue into the next slide.
Okay.
So this is kind of my long and winding path to how I've gotten to where I am. Yeah, not subtle in the metaphor at all. So if you had asked me in high school what I'd be doing now, there's definitely no way I could have really predicted this career for myself. First of all, I didn't even know what consulting was. I had never really heard of it. And as I mentioned, I wasn't really interested in science. You know, I took extra languages so that I didn't have to take science classes. So that was sort of where my head was at. I was always interested in humanities and liberal arts. As you mentioned, I majored in international politics and econ and Spanish. So I was definitely on the other end of the spectrum from where I've ended up. I thought maybe I'd have a career in Washington or something like that. Who knows? I didn't really know. But the summer after my junior year in college, I got an internship at a think tank. It was unpaid. Our payment was through career counseling. And so it was really through that I first kind of even learned of what consulting was. It was really presented as this career where you would solve interesting problems, travel all over the world to meet with your clients, very fast-paced and high-powered. It sounded great, sign me up. So when I got back to school in the fall for my senior year at Penn State, I did a bit of research and I learned that a few consulting firms would be coming to Penn State to specifically recruit through the business school. I was not a part of the business school, but I figured like, why not just go show up and shoot my shot. So I ended up meeting a partner at Deloitte's federal practice. And so that's the group of folks that support government clients. And I was like, okay, this is perfect. You know, it marries sort of the industry that I wanted to join, which was consulting, with my interest in politics. The partner ultimately knew that I had no business experience, but he said that I did a good job selling myself during the interview process. I think I was pretty assertive, and that's ultimately what got me the job. So I was at Deloitte for 2 years. I worked on a variety of different projects. And through those experiences, I realized that government work wasn't actually my cup of tea. So good to know. I had briefly worked on an acquisition project during my time at Deloitte, and I thought it was really fun, really dynamic, very fast paced. So why not try that instead? So a small firm that I had never heard of called Aquis Consulting Group was advertising for a position for a mergers and acquisitions consultant. So it seemed perfect. I jumped on the opportunity. I moved from DC to New York. And Aquis at the time was this very tiny firm with a startup mentality, kind of like, we'll do anything for any client. We just need to start to build a book of business. And at the time, I was one of 2 junior consultants when I joined. So I ended up really just getting thrown in the mix of a lot of different stuff that I would have never had the opportunity to experience if I was still at Deloitte, which, you know, is tens of thousands of people. So Aquis was starting to gain traction in the pharma space. So during my first year there, one of the Aquis partners began to build out this sort of like subgroup or like adjacent consulting group called SSI Strategy that would purely focus on those pharma and biotech clients that we were really starting to build connections with. So I first got involved with SSI work simply because the bulk of the biotech work that we were getting at the time was located in the Bay Area. And I personally was really interested in spending more time in California. It sounded really fun to me. So I went out to San Francisco thinking that it would be, you know, a few month project, and ended up falling in love with the city, meeting my future husband. And so then I guess the rest is history. But for 8 years, I continued to support sort of the growth of SSI by focusing on building out our work in the Bay Area. And obviously over time, I gained a lot of experience, knowledge, and ultimately this passion for the biotech industry, which, as I said, it wasn't even on my radar before, but it sort of became, you know, my life's work. So then in SSI, or in 2020, SSI spun out from Aquis and kind of formally became a separate company. And that's when I joined SSI as part of our leadership team. So today I'm responsible for leading several of our different client accounts and really just helping to continue to grow and evolve the firm. So it's been really kind of a fun, first of all, a fun like journey to be a part of helping to grow these businesses while I'm also consulting for other companies that are a mixture of established and, you know, nascent. But really the key for me, in terms of getting to, you know, ultimately this place where I am today, has been maintaining this healthy balance of purposeful change with opportunistic change, and really kind of jumping on the things that are presented to me and kind of saying like, hey, why not? Let's give it a shot. And if I don't like it, I'll do something else. So really that's my advice to everybody, is to say yes to every opportunity, consulting or not, just because you never really know what you're going to end up, you know, enjoying doing or where it's going to lead you. So I know that's not groundbreaking, but I've seen it in practice myself.
You know, what's funny is that is a theme that's really stood out in, now this is our third webinar this week, starting with Rich Delhaas and yesterday with Alyssa Ludwig. Just, you know, what are those opportunities and how can I take advantage of it and make it the most for my life and where I am right now?
Yeah, I mean, you never know which sort of fork in the road is going to be like this huge, you know, inflection point in your life. Like I would have never thought that I would spend ultimately 9 years in California, and it was great, and it really changed the course of my life, professionally and personally. So you just never know.
Very cool.
Yeah.
And you never know what you're going to end up doing that you had no idea you'd be interested in. As
Exactly.
you said, you're in pharma, so far away from international politics, international policy, right?
Right. But I mean, that is also ultimately one good thing about consulting is you get exposure to so many different companies, so many different industries. So I think I've had sort of the luxury of, almost testing out all of these new potential experiences in a very low risk way. I haven't had to jump from job to job in order to be able to experience like what's going on at, say, 50 or so different companies, but I have had that exposure. It's been really cool.
Can you talk a little bit about your network as well? How much has the who you know led to the next opportunity?
That's everything, especially for a small firm. So if you're working at sort of a name brand company, the network is important. Of course, it's always going to be important. But if you're knocking on some CEO's door and you work for a really prestigious firm, it's a different kind of conversation than when you're coming in and you're saying, hi, I work for this company that you've never heard of, but I think I can offer you a really good solution to your problem. So ultimately the network is everything. We've built SSI really through word of mouth and recommendation from our different clients. They'll move from company to company and bring us along because they've had a good experience with us, and that's really the only way that we could grow. So ultimately who you know and what they think of you is everything in this business.
And what they know about your work style, right? And what you bring to their problems.
Yeah. We talk about this a lot, where it's ultimately like the goal of the consultant is to create value for the client. And that sounds really like vague and high level, but you can create value in so many ways. But really, what can we bring to the table that they don't have there themselves? And then on top of that, do they like working with you? I mean, you don't want to continue working or give a new project to somebody that you just don't want to sit in the same room with. So it's all about sort of that networking and relationship building.
Very good.
So if we move on to the next slide, this is a great segue. All right. So if any of what we've been talking about sounds exciting, there are skills that everybody can begin to develop at any point that will help prepare for a future in consulting. I've tried to kind of outline what the key ones are and sort of some practical ways that we can start to build them. But ultimately, a good consultant doesn't have to be an expert in everything, and there are very few people who could be. But I do think that every good consultant will eventually be able to demonstrate their expertise in at least one of the categories on the side of the technical skills. So that's, my bucket, take it for what it is, but it's analytical skills, executive communication skills, and industry specific knowledge. That's kind of how I've rolled it all up. So for example, if you're somebody who loves numbers, you might be more drawn to building out your skill set around analytics. And that could lend itself to really learning the ins and outs of Excel to be able to create the most advanced model. And you've really kind of carved out a niche for yourself. For me, the biggest game changer was really learning how to craft a strategic narrative. So that really means that I was able to take all of the inputs and all of the data points that we collected over the course of a project and kind of pull that together into an overarching, compelling story that we would eventually deliver to our client. So it's really kind of like summing it all up and turning it into something kind of meaningful that you can take away. So my biggest piece of advice that I always give to people is to start to think about what is your personal brand? What are you going to be known for in the workplace? And how does that align with your personal goals? So for me, I wanted to work on highly visible strategic projects. So by becoming known as somebody who could reliably create that narrative, I became a go-to resource for some of the more complex projects that we were bringing in. And that ultimately meant that I had exposure to some really interesting, new things going on in the industry, and some exposure to higher level client executives who are working on sort of those big ideas. In terms of the softer skills on the right side, you'll see that we have relationship building in there. Again, that's everything, but it's also kind of something that I think you gain more comfort with over time. I sort of think it's a no-brainer. Like, being known as somebody who has a strong work ethic can go so incredibly far. It's not only relevant to consulting, it applies to any career that you choose, but to hit the ground running and be known as somebody who's going to put their head down and get the work done and be enthusiastic and do good work is really an incredible thing to add to your personal brand. So that's my pitch. I'll stop there to see if there are any questions.
How much of this do you think you started to get yourself grounded in high school and what you were learning at GA?
That's such a good question. I think GA set an incredible stage for learning how to think critically in a way that probably most high school students don't have. Thinking about ways to approach problems, thinking about even just like writing skills. I feel like I went into college way more prepared to do a lot of these things. Ultimately, there are some very practical skills, like learning Excel, being incredibly good at PowerPoint, and not just like putting slides together, but being like really good at PowerPoint, that I think you probably learn with some training, like on the job training. But to the extent that, folks can start to bring in some of those tools in how they do their work at GA, I think it can only, strengthen the candidacy of somebody who's interested in consulting in the future. Like, start practicing now.
Right. Not to mention getting you in the right mindset for college, right?
Exactly. Like, thinking about how to approach all of your challenges as solving a problem, I think is really just the basis for consulting.
I can't thank you enough, Kate, for doing this. I wish we had more time together, and hopefully we will find some other opportunities to chat with you and get you connected to our upper school as well.
That's great. No, thank you for having me. And please, of course, feel free to reach out, as I said, over email or LinkedIn. The info's on the screen.